Let us welcome the third speaker. The third speaker is Mr. Taiyo Yorozu.
His speech title is A Meaningful Life. A Meaningful Life. So, Mr. Yorozu, please come up to the stage.
Thank you, Masters of Ceremony, honorable judges. Every day we wake up knowing that this day could very well be our last. People die every day. This doesn't exclude our friends or family. Deep down, we live life knowing that it isn't limitless, and yet we don't always make the most of it. This could be because many of us have been lucky enough to be born into a life that isn't forcing hardships upon us. You may even argue that we have been lulled into a false sense of security, leading us to believe that there's always a tomorrow. I used to be the one of many, living life like this. However, that was changed 10 years ago when I was forced to face the hard truths. The world can be cruel. I had been living in America when it happened. A normal day turned upside down by a natural disaster. A tornado had swept across my city, leaving destruction in its wake. People's homes were lost, their belongings destroyed, and their loved ones stolen. I was lucky enough to be spared, but my friend, he wasn't as fortunate. He was taken before his time, and that is something that I will think about for the rest of my life, trying to live a life rich enough for the both of us. If I could ask you all to take 1 second and imagine a world without the people that you love and care about. Not a world where they don't exist, but a world where they were there for 1 second and gone the next. It would leave anyone lost. It wasn't until that moment that I realized death isn't escapable and is around us more than we realize. So how do we make sure we live a fulfilled life? How do we make the most of the time given to us? My advice to you is this. When you go home tonight, grab a piece of paper and just write down your goals. When I say goals, I'm not talking about small short-term goals like finishing your homework or passing a test. What I mean is a realistic, structured, and detailed plan to ensure you can be the person that you want to be. A lot of people don't recognize how important this is. An interesting study was done about this at Yale University, one of the most prestigious schools in the world. So what they did there was interview a graduating class and ask them, how many of you have a clear set of goals with a written plan for their achievement? Obviously, the number was very low, just 3%. A few decades later, they went back to interview the same class members, and the results were astounding. The 3% who had written their goals seemed to be happier, more stable, and excited as a whole than the rest. However, those things are subjective, but the one thing that we can measure is this. The 3% who had written their goals were worth more financially than the entire 97%. Let me say it again. The 3% who had specific written goals had more money than the rest of the 97% combined. If that doesn't tell you the importance of setting goals, I don't know what will. Now, some people might say, I don't know how to set proper goals. It's easy. Just imagine, if you could have what you needed and wanted, what would it be? What job would you have? What sort of people would you surround yourself with? You need to think through what your life would be if you could have all of that, and then you can aim towards that. However, the process of setting goals is something that should not be taken lightly. There are many people out there in the world who cannot pursue their goals because they lack the courage to take risks. And to those people, I would say that you should be afraid of taking risks to achieve your goals. You should be terrified, but you should be more afraid of being where you are right now if you aren't satisfied with who you are. Remember now, I'm not talking about what makes you happy. Pursuing happiness is a luxury. To pursue what you find meaningful is a moral obligation. And that takes sacrifice. I don't care how smart or talented you are. This cruel world will beat you to your knees and keep you there if you let it. There's also the matter of privilege as well. For example, where you're thrown into as a consequence of your birth. You're thrown into existence with a set of strengths and weaknesses that are not always going to be fair to you, but you cannot let those things define who you are. When you play a game of cards and are dealt a hand of cards, what do? You play the hand the very best that you can. Does that mean all the hands are equal? No. But you don't have a better strategy than doing the very best that you can. And that doesn't mean it'll even be a winning strategy. But the point is you have no better option, and neither does anybody else. My speech today was mainly made up of two parts. In the first part, I talked about how we as humans are mortal. Whether we like it or not, someday and somehow, we will cease to exist. In the second part, I talked about the importance of setting goals, defining who we want to be. These two topics may seem irrelevant, but I included them in the same speech because our mortality is the reason why we must set our goals. The clock is ticking. We don't have forever to be who we want to be. Life is bounded by mortality, but that doesn't mean you don't get out there and contend. Even when the whole world is against you, telling you no and trying to push you out of the way, it's your duty to plant yourself like a rock and say no. You move. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yorozu.
Thank you.
Now we have a question and answer session. Mr. Tamura, please.
All right, Taiyo-san, thank you so much for great motivational speech. Thank you so much. So, different people have different opinions on fulfilled life. Yeah. So, probably it also changes depending on how old you are, as you grow up. Yeah. And the people you meet, and the books you read, and the speech you listen to, it changes over time. Yeah. So, what is your interpretation, definition of fulfilled life?
My definition of a meaningful life is, I think it is hidden in responsibility. The responsibility you have towards yourself, the responsibility you have towards your family, friends, community. I think that is what gives my life worth meaning. I think that in the world nowadays, we are so focused on rights, my human rights, my right to have a freedom of speech. And the thing is, you can't have the conversation without the other. You can't say, I have the right to do this, right to do that, without recognizing that there's responsibility as well. Because your freedoms, your rights are my responsibility, technically. So I think that what gives life worth meaning is responsibility, lifting a load.
So you mean the more responsibility you have, the more fulfilled your life becomes?
Yes.
Okay. So you introduced the Yale University's statistics, and it says that the people who had a goal had a more successful life financially. So why do you think, why is that people with the goal were able to succeed in their lives, financially success? What is the main factor that made them success financially?
I think that one of the most problematic things in the world nowadays is that you can live your life right now without having to worry about the responsibilities that will happen later on in your life. And so what happens is the problem accrues, and then when you're 30 and when you're 40, it hits you like a freight train, and you're left stranded alone. So I think what made them financially secure is the fact that they took responsibility for their lives when they were 10, when they were 20, when they're my age. I think that's the main difference between what those 3% did versus the rest of the 97%.
So this is my last question. So some people argue that, nobody knows what's going to happen in the future. Like setting a goal 3 years ahead would be meaningless because the world in 3 years would be completely different, and probably your value will be different in 3 years. So what do you think? What do you refute that kind of argument?
That is a very important question because a lot of people start to set their goals 10 years from now or 20 years from now. I want to be this. And a lot of people think that it is a straight line, but that's not the case. Most people who are successful, when they start chasing their goals, it goes something like this. And they fail sometimes, or maybe they recognize that their calculations were off. So they start, and then they mess up, but at the end, they reach their goals. So yes, I think the world will be very different from what it is right now, but your goals can remain the same. All you have to do is change them a little by little, get smarter, get more efficient, and you will reach your goal in the end.
All right, that's all, Taiyo-san. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yorozu and Mr. Tamura. Please go back to your seat.